Okay, hello everyone and welcome back to Top Tips for Archaeology Graduates. And I'm really pleased today to introduce one of York's graduates, Catherine, who is going to talk to us about the experiences that she's so far had in her career in museums and working with collections and with volunteers and things like that. So Catherine, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your role and what is some of the things that you do in your everyday job?
Absolutely. So I am a project collections assistant at the Sedgwick Museum of Earth Sciences, which is part of the University of Cambridge. So in that role, I'm working on a collections move project. So we have 150 tons of rock specimens. So that's the museum's petrology collection. And they're being moved from an old, not ideal store into a new purpose-built geological store. So in that, I do all sorts of things that's part of moving such a big collection. So we do documentation of the objects. So it's a great opportunity to see everything we've got. So we're condition assessing, noting down how many we've got, for example. We're also digitizing the collection. So that's taking a sort of bird's eye view shot of a draw of rocks, basically. Packing the specimens for moving. So obviously they can be fragile. We need to make sure that when they go in the van, they don't get broken. So just making sure everything's nice and safe there. And then right at the other end, filling the new fancy racking in the new store. In the role as well, we've got a team of volunteers, or we did have a team of volunteers working on the project pre-COVID. So part of my role was managing that team. So that's everything from helping to recruit them, writing a rota, organising health and safety and training, and then just the day-to-day supervision when they're carrying out their part of the project. And even though we can't have volunteers on site at the moment, I'm still keeping in contact with them. I've written a newsletter for them that I make sure gets written and sent out every month. And recently I've just started a remote volunteering project as well. So quite a varied role really, and that sort of covers basically what I do.
Is that the kind of area of museums that you want to go into, collections care, or is it more the volunteer side, or do you see yourself combining those two things as you go forward in your career?
So it's collections care is sort of really the main aim, but I found in the times in my career I have worked with volunteers that I've really enjoyed it. I started out as a volunteer and I benefited a lot from a good volunteer manager, and so there's part of me that really likes the opportunity of being able to give back. And you also just meet so many interesting people and hear so many life stories. So although it was sort of a collections care ambition, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't be averse to going into a more volunteer management role in the future.
Okay, so how did you go about getting this role? What kind of experience led up to you being in this position?
So like I said, I sort of always wanted to work in either collections care or conservation, that sort of thing, probably since midway through my degree. So I started to build some experience while I was studying. So I organised a placement with the York Archaeological Trust, and then ArcSoc advertised some volunteering at the Borthwick Archives, which was cleaning some of their architectural plans. So I was lucky enough to get that experience, and a lot of it is, right place, right time. And in that, again, like I say, I had a great volunteer manager, and I was lucky that she offered me a paid internship at the end of my degree. So that was my first paid heritage-y collections care experience. From there, I went to work at the National Trust in a property local to York, again, a more house and collections role, and through there progressed to a slightly higher level. And then I thought, I've got all this experience in historic houses, but I'd like to see what a museum's like and if that's any different. So I was lucky enough, I applied for a 6-month contract at the National Museum of Scotland as a collections technician. Yeah, I was lucky enough to get that role. And that really broadened my experience in terms of the types of objects that I got to work with, what I did with those objects, so a lot of moving and packing, and care of those objects. Like I said, that was a 6-month contract. So when that ended, I sort of was in a bit of limbo. I did have to take some temporary administration work just to sort of fill the gap, which was actually really useful. because every job has administration, so really useful skills to learn. And then I was lucky enough to be offered this job, which sort of very much tied in with the moving and packing of objects that I did at the National Museum in Scotland, but also the sort of volunteer management that I'd done at the National Trust as part of the house role there.
That's a really varied story, but also some wonderful experiences. The National Museums in Scotland is one of my favourite places to visit. It's a really stunning museum. It's great.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. So you mentioned right at the very beginning that you'd organised volunteer work with the York Archaeological Trust. How did you go about that? Did you just write to them on spec, or was it an advertised position?
So I was just looking for any experience I could get, really, and they on their website had advertised placements, so you could do curatorial or education, I think, and you just had to apply. Right, I think they had an application form. I did look actually before this, and I think they've been postponed due to COVID, but they do still seem to have a placement section on their website. And it was 3 weeks, so a week was based at the Dig Museum, just sort of doing front of house stuff, and then 2 weeks was with their collections team, sort of based in York, and then they've got the warehouse just a little bit further out of York, and that was just doing all sorts of bits that they needed to do in the collection store, really.
Yeah, so it sounds like a great experience. Over a 3-week period, you got a chance to see lots of different parts of the organisation. So how, or I guess, in what ways has your archaeological degree helped you then in terms of working in the museums and collections world?
Yeah, so I've split this up a little bit in when I've been thinking about how to answer this. So like I say, when I was in about second year, I decided that I wanted to work in museum collections, and I did pick some modules that were based around that. And I know the structure's changed slightly, but it does look like there's still some similar modules. So I did a ceramics module in second year, which was the most like artifact-based module there was in that section. And then I did the historic interiors and the conservation-based assess seminar. So that really allowed me to explore the sort of areas that I was interested in a sort of within my degree. But then more broadly, the transferable skills that I've learned during my degree. So I'd say a big one that I learned how not to do, I'd probably say, if I'm honest, is time management. Every job, whether it's a project like I'm currently working on or just day-to-day activities, has a time management element, and especially your dissertation, for example, it seems like such a long way off that you've got to hand it in, but actually you need to make the most of the time, plan out your time properly. And that is really important in, for example, at the National Trust, I'd be planning the deep clean of the house. And again, it's sort of making the most of the time you've got, planning out, each week, each month, whatever. So that is something that I say is a really big skill I learned from my degree. Also quite a broad one, but critical thinking. Obviously every piece of work you fill in involves critical thinking. And if I relate that to my job now and what I've done in the past, when I look at an object, it's critical thinking. Is there any damage that I need to be aware of? Do I need to avoid certain areas if I'm cleaning it, for example? If I'm packing it, does something need to be supported? It might not seem like the same thing, but it's the same sort of set of skills to, thinking about a piece of work, an essay. And then the public speaking element of the degree. When I looked around as a teenager at doing my degree at York, and they said, you've got to do an assessed lecture at the end of your dissertation, I was terrified, to be honest. I'm not a confident person, but actually being put in those situations, not having a choice to avoid it, is really useful in life in future, even for interviews, that sort of thing, just learning how to prepare, to talk to people, how to present yourself well. That was, again, a really useful part of the degree that I know you don't get at every university. And I'm really grateful, even though it scared me, that I had the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. That sounds like it was a really rich experience for you, your undergraduate degree, and I really relate so well to that sense of public speaking. It was something that made me very nervous when I first started, and practice is the thing that helps. And yeah, I'm really glad that it's, I guess the thing that I want to say is it's not just about learning those skills, but saying, okay, this is something which scares me, but I've done it, and having that sense of achievement as well, which can really contribute as well. That was great. Thank you for that answer, Catherine. So I guess the final question, just to talk a little bit about, I guess, is what advice would you give to graduates who want to follow in your footsteps?
Yeah, so I'd say the first thing, as you've sort of heard me say already, volunteering has been really important in my experience. I was lucky enough to sort of have the opportunity through the department, and I think definitely while you're at university, make the most of any opportunities that are sort of presented to you, whether that's academics in the department maybe needing any help on a project, or whether there's links with museums, that sort of thing. You might not believe it, but actually when you're at university, you've got a good opportunity, you've got time on your hands, you may be a bit more flexible in sort of how you can manage work and that sort of thing. So make the most of anything that comes your way. But equally, if you don't have time, I know people have to work throughout their degrees and can't afford to sort of volunteer everywhere. It is something in the sector that's definitely an issue at the moment that's being addressed in terms of free, volunteering, unpaid internships. Do look out for paid opportunities, paid internships, even if it's just expenses paid. When I did my YAP placement, I got my bus fare paid for, just a little help. And also, like I said before, I've organised remote volunteering. It's definitely something that's becoming more of a thing due to COVID. So if you have to work a full day, you have your degree, you can't manage any volunteering, there might be something you can fit in on an evening. So just really be a bit creative in thinking about what experience you can get. And also, don't just look for what's advertised. Maybe contact a small museum that maybe doesn't have a big team and see what experience you can get there. And you might actually be able to get a lot more experience from a smaller place than a bigger institution that sort of has a set volunteering program. And just to sort of, I guess, a note for the future, you're not going to leave university and get a full-time permanent job in museums necessarily. You might do, but don't let that put you off. I've done a few jobs at once to pay the bills and stuff, but all that experience has led me to where I am now. And don't look at something and think, oh, it's not exactly what I want, I'll look for something else. You never know what you're going to get from that opportunity. And once you're in the door, you might be able to sort of get some experience in another department. So even if you work in front of house, you might be able to do a week or so working with the collections team, or even just having that contact is really useful. So that might be a bit rambly, but basically get experience if you can. If you can't, if you have to work, you've still got transferable skills from that, which is great. And just make the most of any opportunities you can get, even if at the time it doesn't seem quite what you want.
Just a quick follow-up question from that. You've given some really brilliant advice, and one of the points you made earlier in the interview as well was that getting admin experience made a difference to you because there was a lot of admin in your role. I wonder if you said if students are finding it difficult at the moment, or when they graduate, to immediately find a placement, is there any kind of other sectors that you might advise they go and spend some time in while they try and apply for museums positions?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it probably depends what you want to do in museums. So for example, if you're really interested in front of house, even just a job in retail or in catering where you're sort of dealing with members of the public all the time, I'll give you great experience for that. Like I say, every job has administration. And actually, so the project I work on, we use Excel a lot. And I'm sure a lot of places do too. So if you can get some experience where you can build on your IT skills, that would be really useful. And even so when I worked at the National Trust, it was a lot of cleaning. And yes, it's specialist cleaning, but the principles are the same. So even something like that would probably stand you in good stead. Basically, just so you can show that, you can work well as a team, you can communicate well, you've got good IT skills. I'd say there's a lot of jobs that would sort of give you those skills.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Catherine. That was really, really interesting. And you're doing some fascinating work at the moment. I imagine that you never thought archaeology would take you into looking at rocks, but I'm sure it's a really enjoyable experience. So thank you very much to Catherine, and join us again soon for another Top Tips for Archaeology graduates.